Good morning. We'll
Hello.
tilt that up a little bit. Good morning and welcome to, I was going to say virtual worship, but we are in the flesh. But also welcome to those 18 or 19 of us who are joining online. It is good to be with you on this not quite but almost fall day here on the Greeley Courtyard. I'm the Reverend Aaron Stockwell, the senior minister, and it's an honor and privilege to be here. We have reoriented worship, a task which my home congregation needed a pack of cattle to move their entire church in the 1700s. We don't need that today. Whether this is your first time joining us or your thousandth time, you are welcome. Whether you arrived with a spring in your step or not, you are welcome. Here at First Parish, doesn't matter your age, your ethnicity, where you came from, who you love, how you move around in the world. What matters, dear one, is that you are here, a part of this community. So, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Essential. And in this spirit, we light our chalice. If you're joining at home, I invite you to light your chalice and type in the chat, the chalice is lit in our home, or the chalice is lit in my home.
And Rich Lawton will sing for all of us the song of affirmation.
From all that dwell below the skies, let songs of hope and faith arise. Let peace, goodwill on earth be sung, through every land, by every tongue.
Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer, to dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve. This is a different version than the one that you're used to, isn't it? Well, let's just all say that together, starting at the very beginning. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. Dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve all life with compassion. The end, that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant, one with another and with our God. Rebecca Crawford will now lead the time for all ages.
This morning, I don't have one story for you. I have 4. And they're all true. 100% true stories. The first one starts like this. In the beginning, there was nothing. And God looked upon it and she said, there ought to be something here. And so on the first day, she created light. And she looked upon it and she said, it is good. And on the second day, she created the sky. On the third, perhaps you already know this story, she created the mountains and the seas and the rivers and all of the trees and plants. And on the next, she created the sun and the moon and the stars. And on the following, all of the creatures of the sky and all of the creatures of the sea. And then on the 6th day, she created all of the animals, and as it became closer and closer to evening, she created humans in her own image. And then on the 7th day, she said, that is good, and I shall rest. And that day became holy. Our second story starts like this. 18,000 years ago, there was nothing but darkness and chaos. And it swirled together, this chaos, creating a more densely packed situation in which out from underneath that balance of chaos, the yin and the yang. And in the depths of that chaos, there was an egg. And from the egg hatched Panku, a giant. And that giant began to stretch out of his shell, lifting the top part of the egg to create the sky, and emerging from the bottom part of the shell, which became the earth. And as the giant stretched, he grew over 18,000 years, pushing apart the sky and the earth until it was just right. And then the giant, tired, collapsed his arms, and his ginormous arms became the mountains, and it would rain rivers, and lakes and seas were formed, and valleys between the knuckles of his hand. And eventually Panku became old and tired, and Panku died. And from his body, one eye became the sun, one eye became the moon. Our next true story starts like this. The earth and everything that we know in it was at the center of a giant flood, flooding on all sides. There in the center stood the kernel of the earth, and it was flooded. And all of the animals were sad to know that they could not reach down to the earth any longer. And a spirit named Nanabush decided, I shall try and dive down and see if I can't grab hold of some of that earth. And so down Nanabush dove as deep as possibly could, but could not reach the earth. He came up for air and said, it is not possible. And so the loon said, let me try. I shall give it a try. And the loon, being very familiar with diving down for all of its food and sustenance, went down as deep as he possibly could. And over he dove, but he could not reach the depths of the flood to find the earth. And one animal after another gave it a try. And in the end, they thought, it is simply not possible. So the meerkat appeared and said, I'd like to give it a try. And all of the other animals said, you don't know how to dive. You cannot possibly reach the earth. But thanks for your offer. And the meerkat snow-eyed said, no, I'm going to give it a try. And so down meerkat dove, and he disappeared underneath for a very, very long time. And loon and turtle and Nanabush and all of the animals watched the still sea, not finding any sign of life below. And just at the point that they were ready to give up and say, Muskrat has been lost, it is not a possible task at all, up gasped Muskrat, and he took his final breath. But in his paw there was a bit of mud, and the animals all mourned the passing of Muskrat and the sacrifice that he had made to fetch just a little bit of that muddy earth. And so Turtle said, I shall carry the earth that he has found on my back. And pretty soon the sky and the winds began to pick up that little bit of mud and dry it out with the sunlight. And then over time blew all of the winds across it, and it spread that earth until seeds that were inside of it sprouted up, and all of the plants and animals and rivers and lakes appeared. And the animals rejoiced, for there was earth sitting atop the back of Turtle. And perhaps you've heard this one too. In the beginning there was only darkness, and a tiny, tiny speck, thousands of times smaller than a pinhead, was so compressed with energy and matter that it exploded. And it was such a giant explosion that it sent every little bit of energy and matter and antimatter out into the nothingness, spreading, expanding, moving larger and larger. So big the explosion was that it is still growing today. And out of all of that chaos came gases and stuff, the stuff of stars that swirled together and created the sun and the moon and the earth and all of the planets and all of the galaxies and all of the universes that we know today. At the beginning, I told you that all four of these stories are true, and so they are. For none of us really knows the answer of how we all came to be. At any given point in time, across all of the span of humanity, these stories have held true. These stories have anchored us to our own culture. These stories are 100% accurate. And how can that be? For they all conflict one another. And therein lies the ambiguity. Therein lies the question. None of us knows for sure. So very, very many things that we do not know for sure. And yet we create our own truths. And sometimes that is enough.
We now come to this time in our service that we have set aside for sharing the things which weigh deepest on our hearts. I share these which were submitted by email last night before 8 p.m. If you wish to get a joy or a sorrow or a concern shared, please email me before 8 p.m. next week on Saturday. This joy from Nancy Solomon that the beauty of fall is starting to show. Yeah, just about. These sorrows as well. Also from Nancy Solomon, who writes that her friend Claire goes in for surgery soon to have a cyst removed and then a biopsy done. And this concern and sorrow from Donna Nelson, who writes, please keep in your hearts and prayers a good friend of mine, a retired state police fire investigator, Kevin McHannon, who has brain cancer and is in hospice at home. And also a note of thanks from Temple Beth Am after we sent our letter of support to them. They are appreciative of our solidarity. So let us take a moment to quiet our minds that are probably moving miles per minute, to focus on that which grounds us, noticing how we sit on a chair, perhaps feeling the ground beneath us. It is good to be together. and outside, where that connection to the earth is a little bit closer than normal. O Spirit of life and love, named and unnamed, but who knows us by our true first name, which is beloved. I give thanks for this gathering, for the late, late summer breeze blowing on our faces, for this chance to look at each other in our eyes. Look at each other's eyes. In this gathering, we know there is sorrow. There are people living with mental illness, with addiction, people learning and how to live with new diagnoses. May all be reminded that they are loved and lovable, and may we be reminded as well that we can reach out to deliver a casserole or to lend a listening ear. We know too that there are war-torn places in our world. May we work to bring peace and bend the arc of the universe towards justice. And when we slip up and trip up and fumble with our words and say things that might be unintentionally harmful, when we do things that build barriers between us, our authentic selves, and the divine, let us be reminded that there is always time to move into right relationship, always time to say, I'm sorry, and always time to ask, how can I do better? I say these words and do all things for love's sake. So let us sit in the quiet of this space for just a few more moments, so that we might rest or pray the prayers of our own hearts. May it be so. Last week we gathered water together and we left it unblessed for an entire week. So today we bless that water. The water that we bless together today holds molecules that have touched every part of this planet. The water we brought last week has been snow on a mountain, and it has been carried in 1,000 storms. It has washed the face of a newborn baby, nourished the crops of an ancient people, formed the arc of a rainbow, filled a cooking pot. The water connects us not only with each other, but with all who share life with us and all life before us. As we bless our water today, we remember that, like water, we are stronger when we are together. Even small drops of water can eventually change the face of a stone. A trickle of water can make a path for us to follow. A flood of water has the power to change an entire landscape. As we bless the waters of this community, we make a choice to join our strengths and to be a force for good in the world as we make our lives vessels for the holy waters of life. May this water, which will be distilled and then used for rites of passage throughout the year to come, be blessed. May it remind us of the sacredness in each of us and all of us. May we, like a river, carve new routes for kindness, compassion, and love to flow. May we add our strength to help nurture goodness and beauty in the world. May each of us contribute our part to the whole. May this water and this community be blessed.
So much has changed in our world, and even in this congregation, as we continue to adapt to what each new day may bring. Still, our core needs remain unchanged, as do First Parish's need for our financial support. We give to the church to ensure it will be here when we most need it. We give because we love the people who embody this church and the evolving spaces that enable us to gather. By giving, we attest that we believe both in ourselves and in one another, and in manifesting together a future for this congregation. We follow the legacy of those who came before us to ensure we could gather here today. But above all else, we give because we believe in the First Parish community and its roots in our values, our faith, and our friends. We believe in our vision for justice that we can work to bring about together. For those gathered here today at the close of services, please place your offerings in the bowl at the back of the courtyard near the tree. Thank you for pointing that out. And there is a paperweight to go on top so things don't blow away. If you're joining us on Zoom, you can give at our website, uuframingham.org, and click on the Give Now link in the top right corner. Contributions by mail are also welcome. Thank you. In this spirit, we gratefully accept the offering.
Our reading today comes from Letters to a Young Poet, which is a collection of 10 letters written by the Bohemian Austrian poet Rilke to Franz Xavier Campus, a 19-year-old officer cadet at a military academy. Rilke, the son of an Austrian army officer, had studied at the academy's lower school earlier in his life. And Campus corresponded with the popular poet and author from 1902 to 1908, seeking his advice as to the quality of the poetry and in deciding between a literary career or a career as an officer in the Austro-Hungarian army. Campus compiled and published the letters in 1929, 3 years after Rilke's death from leukemia. This is from one of those letters in which Rilke writes to Campus, "I want to beg you, as much as you can, dear sir, to be patient toward all that is unresolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves like locked rooms, and like books that are written in a very foreign tongue. Do not seek the answers which cannot be given to you, because you would not be able to live them. And that is the point, to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then, without noticing it, live among some distant day into the answer." Each week when we gather, we hear the voices reading the spoken affirmation, the words of affirmation. I've been thinking that in this congregation we preach a certain certainty. In that affirmation we speak words of upward progress. I wonder how it will hold up. This common covenant is recited in many other UU congregations, originally written by L. Griswold Williams, published in a book that he wrote in 1933 as the last thing in that book with no other explanation. Last passage. I don't know when you started using it here, though I'm thinking one of you might know and will let me know after the service. It's challenging. It's meant to be. The entire thing is meant to be challenging. And my colleague, the Reverend Nancy MacDonald Ladd, reminds us that it is difficult to preach and to say that all things shall grow into harmony with the divine when things seem to fall apart all around us. This is a line about certainty. It is a line about comfort. It is a line about a hoped-for harmony in a world that is increasingly dissonant and out of tune. How has it held up in these uncertain times? A phrase which I hate hearing, in these uncertain times. I know that the times are uncertain. We as a society have become so used to doing things in a certain way that I think we have lost any capacity for ambiguity and the unknown. It feels as though so many of us have to operate outside of the scope of what we were trained to do. And it would be so comforting to know the path that we're on. It would be so comforting to be able to pick up the playbook from the shelf or pick up the script and know how things would play out. But this is not the world that we live in. And unless you're perhaps a skilled jazz musician or an improv actor, we're not trained to deal with the unknown. How do we befriend ambiguity? How do we lean into uncertainty? What do we do when we continually find that harmony does not exist, that certainty is rare? I'll say this, I'm not an expert at befriending ambiguity. Indeed, not knowing the answer to a question about what happens next drives me crazy. And I find that most of the time, in the midst of an emergency situation, I can respond with remarkable clarity. But when we have a slow-moving crisis, a boring chaos, as Lizzie and I have taken to calling it, we just don't know how to respond. The ambiguity and uncertainty unnerves us. Our surge capacity is gone, and our anger can bubble up. We've forgotten that with nearly every image of certainty, it began with a vague pencil sketch. We instead view the situations we struggle with as though they are like a canvas that's been recycled and the original image is on it, and we're seeing through what we have painted, and we hope for certainty, as though the ambiguous future is visible as well as the dreamed of certain future. We need to remember that everything was done for the first time at some point. Every trail that had been blazed was blazed for the first time. If it weren't for trying for those answers to those unanswerable questions, for trying to find certainty, well, the entire realm of science, for certain, would not exist. To be uncomfortable with the unknown is to be human. It's what we do with that uncomfortability that matters. So when we are faced with ambiguity, what do we do? A few camera angles on this. Sometimes a situation is simply not right for improvisation, or we don't have the skills to improv. When I was in 7th grade, I played for about 6 months in a jazz band. I had been learning how to play the bassoon for a number of years, and when I went to this school in 7th grade, there was no concert band, so there was a ragtag jazz band. And I joined because I wanted to continue my skills, and I hated it. I had just barely learned the basics of bassoon playing, and here I was learning about improv. I hadn't memorized my major scales, so when it came time to solo, I found myself stumbling over the blues scales. Now, as it turns out, bassoon is not a normal instrument for a 7th grader to play, and in a jazz band, certainly less common. I went back to a concert orchestra and then after switched to guitar and learned the beauty of movable scales all up and down the guitar neck, and all of a sudden I was able to improvise and have fun at it. Sometimes the instrument that we use to live into ambiguity makes all the difference. Another camera angle on this. There are two different kinds of uncertainty. A member of my congregation in Texas once reminded me that there are two kinds of certainty. There's aleatory, which is from the Latin meaning throw of the dice, and that is uncertainty due to randomness. And then there's epistemic, from Greek meaning knowledge, which is uncertainty simply because there are limits and limitations to information and data. And a final camera angle, and this is perhaps the most challenging. Instead of focusing on the answer, we need to learn to live into the questions themselves, as Rilke wrote. We learn to love the questions themselves. That's not a setting many of us are comfortable with. Now, for a moment, and actually the rest of the sermon, I want to zoom way out to look at how congregational life is unfolding as if we're from the top of the steeple looking down from the balcony view. We are each also members of organizations that have gone through change. Even if that organization is your neighborhood, your family, watching organizations change, we have all seen it happen. Uncertainty and ambiguity comes when you're in a liminal time, the time between one thing and the next, a time where there is ending disorientation and reorientation. Richard Rohr, Franciscan father and author, explains it this way: that all transformation takes place here. We have to allow ourselves to be drawn out of business as usual and remain patiently on the threshold, where we are betwixt and between the familiar and the completely unknown. There alone is our old world left behind, while we are not yet sure of the new existence. There's a good space where genuine newness can begin. Get there often and stay as long as you can by whatever means possible. This is the sacred space where the old world is able to fall apart and a new, bigger world is revealed. If we don't encounter liminal space in our lives, we start idolizing normalcy. When we feel uncomfortable with uncertainty, we are entering into liminal space. It is because new seasons always begin with an old season of our life ending. And generally, no one is comfortable there. Nobody likes to say goodbye or farewell. There's a book by noted church management and administration expert, which, yes, there are such authors, named Susan Beaumont, called How to Lead When You Don't Know Where You're Going. Now, as I read it this summer, I wanted to get easy answers about how to lead in liminal times, and there weren't any. I was a little frustrated, but not surprised as well. In that book, Beaumont reminds readers that when we enter into new seasons, anxiety rises and motivation falls. People question their attachment to the organization or cause. Old weaknesses can reemerge. All leaders, staff, and volunteer leaders are overloaded. Though there is value, too, in liminal times, though some will want to rush them. Liminal times, some people think, are about organizational failures, but they're not. Another thing that happens in the midst of transition is that the changes that were already coming become intensified. They arrive sooner than we are comfortable with, hastened and quickened. In the early to mid 2000 teens, many religious leaders were studying the thinking of a Christian religious educator by the name of John Roberto. And he was talking about all of the changes that would happen in what we call faith formation, which is everything that we do as a gathering, and imagining what they would look like in the year 2020. And to be honest, as I sat through a couple of those sessions, I thought all of those changes were ridiculous. I thought the predictions he was making were false. I thought the ways of being that we would need to have seemed very far off. I thought that they seemed great for maybe like the year 2030, but 2020, no way. Some of those suggestions were things like using technology to facilitate connection, offering religious exploration in a format where parents were responsible for it, or having services offered online so they could be accessed from wherever. and whenever. And it seemed like it would be a long ways off. But we know that in the year 2020, we did actually offer all of those things. And we adapted very, very quickly. In the midst of liminal times, something beautiful and productive arises. This thing called communitas. Not community, communitas. This, again, according to Susan Beaumont, who writes that it is a Latin noun referring to unstructured community in which all people are equal. In communitas, a sense of common humanity emerges in which all members are experienced as equals. In communitas, we are free to experiment and learn, unencumbered by old expectations and assumptions about how the community is meant to work. We discover a new way of being. Creativity, compassion, daring, and curiosity emerge. Pride, cynicism, and arrogance and callousness drop away. We discover ourselves fully alive and more open to that which is beyond us. So my friends gathered here in the midst of liminal times, moving from one phase to the next, we have an opportunity to use ambiguity as a time to examine everything carefully and actually emerge not stronger necessarily, but different. Let us befriend ambiguity, even if it is tough, so that it might lead us into the new. May it be so, and amen. And now Rich Lawton will sing for us, Love Will Guide Us. The version that Rich will be singing is the actual full song. When they were putting our hymnal together, they decided to take out 2 verses, and Rich will be singing the whole thing for us.
Will guide us, peace inside us, hope inside us, will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night. If you cannot sing like angels, if you cannot speak before thousands, you can give from deep within you. You can change the world with your love. You are like no other being. What you can give, no other can give. To the future of our precious children, to the future of the world where we live. Hear the song of peace within you. Heed the song of peace in your heart. Spring's new beginning shall lead to the harvest. Love will guide us on our way.
Now is the time that we will extinguish the flame of our chalice. I will extinguish it here. If you're joining us online, feel free to extinguish that. And as we extinguish this flame, we know that we take it out into the world. And so as we leave this friendly place, let us take the light of love out into the world and use it to brighten our pathways. And when we need to rest or recharge, be challenged or affirmed, may that light guide us safely back. May we hold the light always, and the light hold us always. Amen, and go in peace.